Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of March of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And as for the end of the 12th of March, there are two the most interesting and the most important topics related to Ukraine. The first one is the battle for Sudzha and possible consequences of this situation, and the second very important question is the 30 days ceasefire that was proposed by the United States of America. The consequences, the real results, and what kind of benefits each side is going to receive if they accept this ceasefire. First, let's talk about Sudzha, because the Russians continue their offensive operation, and as for the end of the 12th of March of 2025, the Russians managed to secure probably up to 70% of the entire Sudzha agglomeration. As for the city of Sudzha, the city was completely secured by the Russians by the morning of the 12th of March, and during the previous 12 hours the Russians were advancing further in the western and the northwestern directions towards the settlement of Goncharovka and the settlement by the name of Zaleshenka. As for the end of this day, the Russians managed to take under control up to 40% of Zaleshenka. This is the settlement that is located in the northwestern part of the Sudzha agglomeration. Now let's take a look at the map and let's compare the changes. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 11th of March of 2025. As you can see, the Ukrainians were controlling up to 90% of the Sudzha agglomeration, but by the end of the 12th of March of 2025, the Ukrainians controlled just 30 or 40% or something like this. The Russians are advancing. We had lots of updates. And some of the updates we got were confirmed and were provided by different geolocations and videos, and based on these reports we adjusted this map in Russian favor. Several updates were published by neutral resources and by pro-Ukrainian resources. For example, today, probably for the first time since the beginning of the Russian pipeline operation, the Ukrainians confirmed that indeed they were forced to fall back completely from the most eastern and the northeast and the southeastern parts of the Sudzha agglomeration. Different pro-Russian resources reported, as usually, completely different situation. We're talking about additional advance. The Russians, according to pro-Russian resources, are about to enter the most western outskirts of the settlement. The situation for Ukrainians is very difficult. We're not saying that Ukrainians are planning to counterattack or to hold the lines. Now the Ukrainians have just one question: how to save servicemen, how to save vehicles, how to save as many as possible. But we see that Ukrainians suffer significant losses, and most likely they will lose almost everything. Some military experts and those who are related to the situation stated that by the end of the 12th of March, the Ukrainians lost up to 70% of those who were involved in this evacuation process, because the Russians are attacking the Ukrainians not just on their way between from the settlement of Sudzha towards the mainland with FPV drones and artillery strikes. The Russians also attack and bomb the Ukrainian temporary deployment points with Iskander missiles. And for example, during the previous 24 hours, lots of let's say attacks were recorded. For example, this is the video from the settlement of Gueva. And this is the place where the Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation. I don't know why, but for some reason the Ukrainians decided to, let's say, to establish their defense and to stabilize the situation, at least in this part. And now the Ukrainians are sending more and more forces with the purpose to hold these territories as long as possible. And it's like, it seems that the Ukrainians are planning to defend this village of Gueva and the village of Garnal even more, and than they spent resources and energy to protect and to defend the city of Sudzha itself. The Russians control everything, as you can see, and they bomb and attack. Also, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours made lots of attempts to bring additional forces exactly in this area. Maybe the Ukrainians believe that this significant number of different tree lines and forests allow them to hold their positions and to hide themselves from the Russian satellites. Know that the spring is coming and soon we're going to see lots of leaves on the grass, on the trees, so these leaves will obviously protect the Ukrainians from satellites and from drones. So that's why we believe that they will try to hold these territories as long as possible, because from the other side, this is the shortest way how to attack in the direction of Sumy. The attack in the direction of Sumy, another important question, another important situation that everybody is asking themselves every single day, whether the Russians are going to continue their offensive operation or not. As for now, nobody knows for sure whether the Russians are going to do this or not, but one thing we know for sure, that the Western countries in Ukraine and the United Kingdom are trying to do everything to prevent this situation. Today, the negotiation process between the United States of America and Ukraine ended, and according to this negotiation process, Ukraine accepted the proposal of the United States of America of 30 days ceasefire. So this is very important. Ukraine expressed its readiness to accept the US proposal to immediately introduce a temporary 30-day ceasefire, which can be extended by mutual agreement of the parties. The US immediately lifts the pause in intelligence sharing and restores military aid to Ukraine. The presidents of the US and Ukraine agreed to conclude a comprehensive agreement on the development of Ukraine critical minerals resources as soon as possible. So as you can see, the Western countries are trying to force Russia to accept this agreement, to accept this ceasefire, but the problem is that this is not like a ceasefire, this is something like a 30 days break, because the Ukrainians will not change anything. According to information we have, as we understand, the United States of America will continue sending weapons and money to Ukraine. Furthermore, according to information we have, Zelensky is not going to cancel the martial law, and Zelensky is going to continue mobilization process. But the main problem and the main thing, and probably the main trick of this situation, because if the Russians accept this ceasefire proposal, then it doesn't matter who is going to be, let's say, responsible for breaking of this ceasefire. Obviously, the Russian side is going to be the sign that everybody in the world will blame the Western countries and the European Unions. And the most important problem, that if anybody, either the Russians or the Ukrainians, break this ceasefire agreement, most likely we understand that the European countries, the European Union, and of course the United States of America will act more aggressively in comparison with the previous stage of the special military operation. As for now, the Russians have two options: either to refuse this ceasefire right now without any compromises with the Western countries, but for this, Russian Federation will get a lot of problems from the Western countries, and the most important, from the United States of America. A lot of sanctions, a lot of problems, and many other things that will make the life of regular Russians and Russia itself much worse than Russia has right now. But on the other side, if Russia accepts these 30 days, let's say, ceasefire, obviously the Western countries, just for the media, for people, will show that we have normalizing our relations with Russia. Western countries most likely for these 30 days will lift sanctions and many other things, and maybe the Russians will be able to get some money from this situation. But by the end of the 30 days, let's say, ceasefire, the Russians will have two options: either to close their eyes and to allow the Ukrainians to get more weapons from the Western countries, to allow the Ukrainians to arm itself more, to allow Ukrainians to mobilize more soldiers, and maybe to allow the Ukrainians to allow the Western countries to deploy their forces along the line of combat contact. And this will allow the Russians probably to get another 30 or 60 days of very good living without sanctions, with probably SWIFT, with dollars, with euros, and many other things. But sooner or later, most likely, this will be finished, and the special military operation will start from the beginning, but it's going to be much more difficult, because then the Russians would be forced to fight not just with Ukraine but with the European countries, at least with the peacekeeping troopers. So that's why it's very important for Russia to make a correct decision right now. And as I understand, Putin is thinking right now, because despite lots of statements and lots of words that were made by the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, Putin haven't made even a single comment about the situation. The only thing we have is that the statements from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lavrov. He stated that what is important to us is not a ceasefire that will allow Ukraine to arm itself again and again, against the Russian Federation, but a long-term sustainable peace based on eliminating the root causes of the conflict. I believe that Putin first wants to see the proposal by the United States of America, because today we got another statement made by the different authorities, and for example Peskov, the press secretary of Vladimir Putin, stated that the Russians still haven't received anything from the United States of America regarding this peace plan. The Kremlin first reaction to the US proposal for ceasefire. Russia is carefully studying the statements following the US-Ukraine talks. Moscow assumes that the Secretary of State Rubio and Trump's national security advisor Waltz will brief on the details of the talks in Saudi Arabia. So as you can see, the Russians still don't know the exact details. Contacts are planned in the coming days, which the Kremlin will inform about. Russia does not want to get ahead of itself on the issue of the proposed ceasefire. It first needs to receive information from the United States of America. The Kremlin does not rule out the topic of a high-level telephone conversation may arise during the contacts between Russia and the US. A telephone conversation between Putin and Trump can be organized very quickly if necessary, since there are no agreements on it yet. So the thing is that the negotiation process between Ukraine and the United States of America ended basically yesterday, but Russia still don't know any details about this. And the day after tomorrow is Friday, and according to Trump's plan, the call between Trump and Putin should start it on Friday. And obviously the Russians don't have enough of time to think if they get details about the situation. So let's wait and see, obviously. But once again, most of the military experts decided that the Russians will refuse to accept this ceasefire proposal, or the Russians will mirror their own demands, which will be very difficult for the United States of America, Ukraine, and the European Union to complete or to accept, because basically this is going to be completely impossible. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, because during the previous days we've been talking a lot about Sudzha, but telling the truth, we have significant progress of the Russians along the entire line of combat contact, and not just in the Sudzha direction. And first let's talk about several Iskander strikes that were carried out by the Russians all over the entire territory of Ukraine. In this video we can see the city of Kryvyi Rih, and as you can see, the Russians managed to discover the temporary deployment point of the Western volunteers, according to the Russians, and as a result of Iskander, the hotel by the name of Druzhba was completely destroyed. You know that this is a very funny situation, because several days ago the Ukrainians attacked the pipeline of Druzhba with drones, and now the Russians attacked the hotel of Druzhba. So basically two different, let's say, infrastructure objects, but with the same title, was attacked both by the Russians and the Ukrainians. Several explosions took place in the city of Dnipro. In this video we can see another drone attack of the armored force of Russian Federation. Now let's move to the line of combat contact. We got a lot of updates. The Russians slowly but step by step are moving in this Orekhov direction as well. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to secure the settlement of Petykhatki completely. In this video we can see two Russian soldiers that established Russian flag in the most northern part. Later, pro-Russian resources confirmed this information. As for now, we still don't know for sure the exact status of the western and the eastern part, so let's wait for additional updates, or at least let's wait for the report of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. So we see that the Russians are moving in the northern direction and are not going to stop. Another important updates are coming from this Orekhov direction. In this video we can see how the Russians, within a very short distance, were bombing and attacking with tank the edge positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. So as for now we can't say anything for sure, but it seems that the Russians began moving in the northern direction as well. So we see that this direction is very active, and maybe this is the reason why Zelensky asked or accepted the proposal of the United States of America, where there is another, let's say, ban of let's say, for fighting along the line of combat contact. So as for now we don't know for sure what is going to be next, but obviously we see that the Western countries are trying to do everything they can but to get Ukraine to better and stronger position. When talking about the South Donetsk direction, there are very heavy clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians. According to neutral mappers and according to pro-Ukrainian sources, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Novoselka. According to pro-Ukrainian and neutral sources, the Ukrainians control up to 50% of this village. Furthermore, according to the same sources, the Ukrainians counterattacked between the settlements of Privolny and Burlatskaya, and the Ukrainians managed to restore control over these fields, as for now without geolocations. When talking about geolocations from this direction, the main number of them are coming from the settlement of Dniproenergia. First, this information about the fall of Dniproenergia was confirmed and provided us by several reliable pro-Russian resources. Later, the same information was confirmed by the Minister of Defense. The Russians reported that as a result of active actions, the Vostok group of forces managed to establish complete control over this village. And later, right before we start making the video, we got the Russian soldier episode where the Russian soldier raised the flag of the unit that was involved in this offensive operation on some building in the most northern part of the settlement. So this is exactly the building where the Russian soldier raised his flag. Based on this video and based on the reports of reliable resources in the Ministry of Defense, we have adjusted the map in the Russian favor. So basically the village of Dnieproenergia was captured and secured by the Russians. As for the Bogatyr direction, we stopped receiving anything from this territory. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians are regrouping. Probably the Russians decided to take a small pause until they understand what are they going to do next. As for now, the main focus we can see in the South Donetsk direction. Maybe when the Russians are able to improve their positions along the river of Mokre Yale towards the settlement of Kamar, and when the Russians are able to improve their positions in the Dnipro directions towards the village of Gorkova, maybe then the Russians will begin offensive operation in the direction of another pocket with the purpose to create another cauldron and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory as well. As for the Pokrovsk direction, the main activities and clashes took place during the previous 24 hours in the area of Lysovka. The Russians were bombing and attacking the H positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, and based on the video published by the Russian side, we have adjusted the map in this area back in Ukrainian favor. So now we have proofs that Ukrainians control this part of the settlement. Now let's move further and let's discuss the Konstantinovka direction. Today we got video that confirms Ukraine control over the intersection of roads between the city of Pokrovsk and the city of Konstantinovka. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were counterattacking the Russians in the farms in the vicinity of the intersection of roads, which means that the intersection itself is under complete Ukrainian control. In this video the Ukrainians attacked the Russian positions, and after the Ukrainian tank was empty, the Ukrainians withdrew. So based on this video we have adjusted this part in Ukraine's favor. The farms remain under complete Russian control. As for the city of Terez, the situation here still is very difficult. The Russians from one side are trying to improve their positions in the vicinity of New York, trying to cut the pocket between Russian positions in the city of Konstantinovka, and we believe that the Russians are about to begin about to intensify their activities in this pocket with the purpose to cut this territory. We're talking about this area. From the other side, we continue receiving updates of Ukraine attempts to counterattack the Russian units on the territory of Zabalka micro district. Today we got another video that confirms additional progress on the ground of the armored force of Russian Federation, and based on this video we have adjusted the map in Ukraine's favor. Currently we see that as a result of counter-offensive operation carried out by the Ukrainian side, they managed to restore up to 30% of the Zabalka micro district, which is obviously very big territories. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Chasov Yar direction. And probably from this area we got one of the most important updates after reports we got from the Sudzha direction. Today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Novomarkova. This is the village we're talking about. As you can see, based on the report of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, we have adjusted the map, and as you can see, we have colored lots of territories, fields, tree lines, and the fortifications. Very interesting report, by the way, and it's not just, let's say, Russian captured just a regular no-name village. This village is located, as you can see, on the Ukrainian side of the Siversk and Donbass canal, which is very important. And now it's very difficult to understand what the Russians are going to do next, because since the beginning of the special military operation, nobody even could think that the Russians would be able to do this. But this time came, and now we need to start thinking what the Russians may do next. Currently, the distance, possible distance between this settlement of Novomarkova, possible positions of the Russian forces, and the city, for example, of Kramatorsk is already less than 30 kilometers. So who knows, maybe the Russians are planning to carry out something they managed to complete in Sudzha with the pipeline operation. Maybe the Russians are going to do something like this in the vicinity of the city of Kramatorsk, which will lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense, and they will be forced to start running away from their positions. Who knows, because this breakthrough is very important. Maybe the Russians made a mistake when they made this report, but because we had such mistakes in the past when talking about Siversk. As for now, let's keep an eye on this position and this direction, because everything is possible. The Russians can begin their fast lightning attack in the direction of Kramatorsk, and this can lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian positions. Also, the Russians maybe crossed the Siversk and Donbass canal to secure their flanks, and now they're ready and are able to attack in the northern directions towards the settlement of Alexandrovka, because if the Russians are able to capture this Alexandrovka, this will lead to complete collapse of the Siversk direction. So everything is very difficult, but this progress changes cards, obviously, and everything may happen here. Now let's discuss the situation in the Siversk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. From one side, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the city of Siversk, the Ukrainian FPV drone positions, artillery positions, and the temporary deployment points and the warehouses. On the other side, the Russians continue their offensive. Today, as you can see, we have adjusted the map in the vicinity of this forest and in the most northeastern part of the settlement of Verkhnykamensk. We have two videos. When talking about the northern video, we see that the Russians landed in this area and attacked the Ukrainian positions with a significant number of armored vehicles, infantry fighting carriers, and tanks. The Russians landed in the vicinity of this forest and began offensive operation. Maybe by this evening, the Russians will be able to secure this territory completely. It's very difficult to understand, and the Russians managed to improve their positions along this tree line. One thing we can say for sure, that the Russians are attacking towards the settlement of Grigorovka, and as for this stage of offensive operation, the main purpose and the main task of the Russians is to take under control this forest, a very huge number of forests in this area, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If the Russians are able to take them under control, the village of Grigorovka falls, obviously, and the village of Serebryanka will be the next. At the same time, the Russians improved their positions in the northeastern part of Verkhnykamensk. The video was published by the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians were attacking the Russian units, lots of casualties. We will not watch this video. Also, the Russians continue their offensive operation along the river Oskol. Today, the Ukrainian sources published a very interesting video of how they were FPV droning and attacking the edge positions of the armored force of Russian Federation. This video was geolocated, and in this video we can see how Ukrainian drone dropped grenades on the heads of Russian positions in the most northern part of the settlement of Boguslavka. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map, and obviously this is a very huge and significant progress and the breakthrough of the armored force of Russian Federation. Basically, the Russians managed to take under control the settlement that is something like a destination point of this direction. This direction used to have the title of the Boguslavka direction, but the Russians basically captured the village of Boguslavka, which means that this direction is no longer the Boguslavka direction, but this is already either Novoplatonovka or Barova directions. So the Russians are advancing, and I'll remind you that the last report from this area we got was several weeks ago or several days ago that the Russians crossed the river Voskol and established some foothold on the Ukrainian side of the settlement of Sinkova. So we see that after a very long operational pause, the Russians resumed their activities in this area, and the Russians are trying to advance with the purpose to defeat the Ukrainians here as well. And we are coming back to the Sudzha direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. Once again, we believe that by the end of the 12th of March, the Russians will secure Zaleshenka, so it's going to happen today, and probably somewhere by 2 or 3 a.m. of the 30th of March of 2025 this will happen, and somewhere by 5-6 p.m. of 30th of March the Russians will secure the settlement of Goncharovka, and this is going to be the last minutes and the last hours of Ukrainian presence on the territory of Sudzha agglomeration, and then the Russians will think how to move further towards the border with Ukraine. And that's it for today. Military Summary Channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.